Welcome to another episode of Rose Resource Room. Today we've got a guest so legendary in the homeschool world and beyond. Even misplaced modifiers bow in respect when he enters the room. He's a master of motivation and the one who can make my 8-year-old and 10-year-old boys say, wow, writing is actually kind of cool. That's right. It's no other than Mr. Andrew Fudua, the mastermind behind IEW, the Institute for Excellence in Writing. Welcome to the show. I'm thrilled to have you.
Thank you, Ro. It's good to be here with you.
Thank you so much. So, I may have to just do a fair warning for some of the guests who do listen. I'm going to resolve to using some multi-syllabic words that may twist my tongue into knots. So, if I suddenly start mumbling, just know it's for the sake of linguistic elegance. You will not hear me slipping using banned words like go or went or come, right? So, this is going
No.
to be a basic word-free zone, and we're raising the bar one sophisticated syllable at a time. So, Mr. Pudowa, please introduce yourself, share your journey leading up to homeschooling and the creation of IEW.
Yeah, sure. I guess the most important thing is that I have 7 children and 8 grandchildren. We began homeschooling way back in about 1997. And my two oldest children were 10 and 8 at the time. They had been attending a wonderful little cottage school style Montessori-ish uh, thing at someone's house with a dozen kids. And it was wonderful. We loved it. But then she had to quit doing that. And so we had to look for options. Um, the private schools were too expensive, really, for our income at the time. My wife was at home with a baby. She has a degree in elementary education, so had had some very firsthand experience with the public schools. We were living in Bozeman, Montana, and that wasn't really a good option either. So we knew a few homeschoolers. I had read a couple books on homeschooling and classical education. And so we just said, well, let's do it. We were running a home business, so having a couple kids at home that could help a little bit was very, very useful. And we just never turned back from there. Almost all the children were homeschooled for almost all of their years. I did put one kid in school for short periods of time, mainly to try and help save their mother's sanity. But every time I did so, I kind of regretted it. And so homeschooling became kind of the way our family was. And in uh, 1995, I had done my very first teaching, writing, structure, and style seminar, kind of just a shot in the dark, a side gig to see is it possible that I could do something else to make a little extra money so that I could afford to continue being a music teacher, which isn't a great way to support a family. And it worked pretty well. We made a set of videos. They were horrible. So I made another set of videos, which were also not very good, but we did sell them for a few years. And then in 99, we moved from where we were to California, and I went full time. And IW started to grow from there. Got a good opportunity to make a much higher quality set of videos, 2000, '01, '02, and then that became the foundation for what we began to do. We are now a company with over 50 employees. We have sent materials all over the country, all over the world, and it's been a great joy to be a part of this growing, very exciting aspect of alternatives to the public schooling model for many, many people. And of course, now there are so many more resources and options today for people who want to take responsibility for their children's education, primarily out of the home. Although many people, of course, supplement with things like co-ops or hybrid schools, cottage school things. And so we're IEW, we're in all of that. And the materials have proven to be very effective, particularly for some of the reluctant writers. And I'm just so happy to be able to support the state homeschooling organizations as much as possible.
And we thank you for all that you've done. I know you had a stint in Japan. Can you talk a little bit about what got you to Japan and how that has shaped your life and career?
Yeah, sure. I was I dropped out of college. I did a year and a semester at the University of California, and I realized somehow that this was just not a good place for me to be.
Mhm.
And I ended up dropping out of school, and then I went to work for a small nonprofit organization. It had a small school attached to it, and they knew that I had grown up playing the violin and invited me to teach violin. And so I did, and I thought this is kind of fun, but I don't really know what I'm doing. And I thought, well, I kind of need a career. I can't work for this nonprofit forever. And I know that I don't want to go back to kind of a traditional university environment. And so the idea of going to Japan to study with Dr. Shinichi Suzuki at the Talent Education Institute came into my mind, and I pursued that, and it was an opportunity. So I left the place where I was. I went and lived in Japan for 3 years, graduated from the Talent Education Institute, and became, I guess, certified, qualified, whatever you want to tell it, Suzuki violin teacher. I then came back from Japan after 3 years, taught violin, and also learned about the principles of child brain development from an organization I worked for at the time called the Institute for the Achievement of Human Potential. And that was very much, I would say, providential, divine direction, God's hand in my life,
Yeah.
really. And I learned so much about children's brains and how they grow and developmental stages. And that fit very well together with the Suzuki method. And so I did that really full time for 7, 8 years. I taught music. I expanded into kinder music, which was an early childhood group class, and that fit very well. And I loved it. I really loved teaching music. Um, and I would have kind of just done that forever, except as I said, with a growing family, trying
Yeah.
to keep my wife home, I was always looking for kind of another little business I could do on the side. And it's interesting now that so much of my teaching has been so strongly influenced by those opportunities. Learning in Japan, my experience with Dr. Suzuki, being in Philadelphia at the institutes from Glenn Doman and the marvelous staff there. And I love to talk to young people about, be willing to follow the promptings of the Spirit, even if it's something weird or radical. It could be that that's how the Lord wants to prepare you
Right.
for your mission in life.
That's
And
right.
that's where I look back now.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that because I've never had the linear career of study accounting, become an accountant, go to law school. Like I've never had that linear career. It was like I was an educator, then I worked as a consultant, then a coach, and then in human resource. And I'm like, God, what are we doing here? And now when I get to interview all these amazing people and then coach in my productivity coaching business, I say, okay, I see it all coming together much clearer. So thank you for sharing that. I've been using IEW for a couple years, and it wasn't until I saw your method that it dawned on me that how we teach is absolutely bananas, right? We give a kid a blank sheet and we say, what do you think about this? Okay, that's great. Put it on paper, right? And like that's what I did even in college. Somebody said, write about this topic, and then I wrote it, and it was, there was like no format. And then you taught this amazing method of how to actually get these thoughts onto paper. So I guess my question would be, in a nutshell, what are some of the issues related to writing or the way we teach writing, the way writing is taught?
Well, I like to use the comparison that if we had taught music in the same way that we've taught writing for the last, oh gosh, 50 years probably, it would go something like this. Sure, come on over to my place. I'll teach you piano. I'll teach you how to press the keys and push the pedals and maybe read notes. But there is one little rule here. You can't play anything that anyone else ever played. You kind of have to just make it up on your own. Be creative, be unique, be original, express yourself. And of course, what level of musicianship would we get if we used that approach? Instead, we say, play this piece, play it this way, very precisely, imitate something and do that for years to build up a foundation of basic skills. And then on that foundation of basic skills, creativity, genuine, meaningful creativity becomes possible. And this is a theme that I've seen in all different areas of modern education. This idea of creativity as the god. Once we had short history of the education in the world. Um, for a long time we had a way of doing things based on the truth that we had discovered, as human race, going back all to pre-Christian ancient times and all through, the early medieval, late medieval Renaissance, even into the Enlightenment period. We had a foundation of knowing how to teach grammar and logic and rhetoric. And these things were, of course, the keys to good thinking, so good expression. And then around the 50s and 60s, we had this, well, we've got to kick God out of education. We have to be completely secular, disconnected from any religion or tradition. So now we're going to, make a new God, because when you kick God out, you got to have an idol. So when I was in school, this is started 60s, 70s, creativity became the god. If it was good, it was creative. If it was good, if it was creative, it had to be good. So just let children do anything, call it good, and that's what we started to do. And I think that was what you experienced many decades after I did, and it had gone, I think, even further away from the tradition of learning basic skills. And of course, then we actually found that didn't work. Test scores went down, performance went down, motivation went down. They kicked out creativity and replaced it with a new god, which was standards. Like, if we just tell everybody what every fifth grader should be able to do and make a long list of things, then all the teachers will teach to the test and we'll get better results. The problem is when you do that, you're teaching to a test rather than teaching children in the way they need to be taught. So there was all these high and lofty goals. Perhaps you remember things like the Common Core State Standards Initiative and state standards here and all of this, but it didn't work at all. And test scores continued to decline, and student performance continued to decline. College and university instructors began to complain more and more about the poor language skills of students coming into their classes. And so they kind of kicked that idea away. You don't hear anyone talking much about state standards anymore. The new God, of course, is technology, right? So if we just equip every kid with, a Chromebook and access to the internet, then somehow they're going to magically learn everything they need to learn to function in the modern world. This, of course, is failing miserably as well. So where we are, and so many of the homeschoolers that I meet are saying, couldn't we go back to when people could write well and read well and think well? As you mentioned before we started recording, listen to long debates and engage with them intellectually rather than be dumbed down to 30-second sound bites that don't have any depth or support. Um, and so many people are saying, well, what did we used to do? The problem is nobody alive today grew up that way, except maybe super old people, but most of us were victims of this modernism. But we have seen kind of a revival of this. Some people will call it classical education. I think the best definition for classical education is education the way it used to be, you know? And so that's kind of where we've settled is let's develop the basic skills. Let's give the foundation in the meaning of words and how to use words. Let's build the database of high quality and beautiful, winsome language and general knowledge and competency. And then, of course, what we discover is when we go there, we not only get better, speaking, writing, and thinking, we actually get better motivated students because now they know what to do rather
Right.
where your kids may have been, which is the blank paper, blank brain. I can't think of anything.
Right. Or it was fun, it was big, which is not what they say orally. Because I will have these conversations like, okay, so let's cue it up. What are you going to say? And I get this eloquent speech. I'm like, that's wonderful. Go
Yeah.
write it.
Write it down. I
And then
can't.
you get the it was big, it was fun. You're like, wait, what happened?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. So, one thing that I noticed, like watching your videos with the kids and um, understanding your approach, you use humor a lot. Is that you talked about like child development and neurology? Is that something that you learned that was important, or is that just personality so it comes natural, or both?
Um, I think a combination of both. Initially, I'm just teaching music, teaching people. I started to do, public speaking and group classes um, around 97, 98. And I discovered with children that if you can get them to chuckle every now and then, they will naturally be more attentive. And I think we find this true. Like if we go to church and hear a sermon, and not gratuitous humor, which is okay, the pastor has to tell a joke and then launch into his lecture. But if you can find the mirth in things, if you can find the natural harmony of disparate things, there's a resolution that happens and there's a joy that comes from that. And that's what jokes are. They're the resolution of a dichotomy. Puns are all based on that. And so I began to kind of study humor because I noticed that when I could get kids to chuckle, they would pay attention. When they could pay attention, they would learn more and better. And I also noticed that intelligent, I wouldn't even say intelligent, but children who have a broader base of knowledge and experience, they find humor in things more easily, right? You know memes and jokes. It's like if you know something, then it's funny. If you know the meaning of the word, there's there's the humor in it. And if you don't know the thing, then it's not funny. And so I've understood that when you can connect general knowledge, be it history, science, languages, whatever, in a way that children they get it, they enjoy that. They will smile, they will laugh, and they'll be like, I know that. And so it's all kind of a combination. But then I did go and I studied humor quite a bit. I even designed a talk called Humor in Teaching and Speaking to try and help people who don't feel like they don't naturally have
Naturally.
a sense of humor. They can develop it. Anyone can learn to tell jokes, and jokes are very useful in so many ways. But on the other hand, I don't want to become frivolous. I don't want to become base. I want to use humor to elevate the conversation and the relationship that children have. And so there are different types of humor
Right.
that come in. And then we know from the business and professional people, and you've probably come across this in your work, that when people are experiencing that those moments of joy, they work better together.
That's
They
true.
they bind, they listen, they have attentiveness, they look forward. So there's always that balance. I don't want to tell dumb jokes just for the sake of a laugh.
Right.
If I can get that smile, that chuckle, that twinkle in the eye,
Mhm.
then the engagement is so much better. And that's true with adults, and I teach adults as well as with children.
That's a really important distinction that you made because for me, I'm an American born Jamaican. And for me, education is serious business, right? Like, I am not here to entertain you. I'm not here to be animated. I'm not going to do the clown tricks and all that to get you to learn. It's serious things. I want you to be sitting properly. And I had to unlearn some of that when I started teaching my boys. So I still don't do, I'm still not the clown. I'm still not doing tricks just to get them to pay attention. But what you said is you're using humor to elevate. What I realized is the problem I had with the humor was people were being silly and almost embarrassing themselves just for the laugh, just for, and I'm like, you're actually losing the kids because they start laughing. They're talking to everyone, and they're so focused on what happened that they missed everything that happened after that. So I think the important distinction you made is that it's to elevate, and the humor is not it's this silly. Your joke's actually pretty intellectual. So I really appreciate how you use both of them. I remember my boys were learning Mandarin a long time ago, and I can't remember the name of the program, but there was so much humor in it, and it allowed them to remember and actually want to do it more. So I understand the beauty of it, but the distinction you made is what I needed to hear. So thank you for sharing that.
It was interesting when I was in Japan. I studied Japanese pretty seriously. I logged an hour to two every day for probably 2 years, and I spent all my spare time with Japanese people. And as I got better and better, I actually started to learn some jokes in Japanese, like a
Mhm.
play on words in a language that you don't know that well.
That's impressive.
And what it did was it actually enhanced my understanding of the vocabulary and the grammar of the language. And I thought, well, that was true for me. Plus, it's pretty cool to be able to tell a joke in Japanese to Japanese people,
Oh yeah.
them laugh, you know. But I think it does enhance language because there's a subtlety, there's a logic that stretches them and in a relatively painless way. And once in a while, you get a kid who's just blank, like, I don't get it. Okay, and then you can explain it, and then maybe they do get it. So
Right.
finding the humor that's at just the right intellectual level for
Hmm.
students or the audience, that's a skill and an art, and I think anybody can develop that if they want to.
I love that. So give us a sneak peek. Once people attend this Midwinter Conference, February 21st and 22nd in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, what can they expect to hear from you? We know that you're the keynote and you have a couple sessions. What can we hear?
Well, the first session is probably the more serious talk. It's called Conquering Cup Culture by Raising Christian Communicators. And really, I'm going to be talking about conquering, like we're in a war. It's a spiritual war. It's been going on for a long time. It will be going on after I leave the scene. But when we realize that there is this spiritual battle happening, we can prioritize our time, talents, and resources better. Talk a little bit about corruption and that's a huge word, but I zero in on the problem of relativism. That essentially you can define truth yourself. You can say what you want to be true and then believe it's true and operate your life, but that doesn't conform to the laws of nature and the laws of God. And I'm sure you've heard people, all too often, I hear young people, say, well, my truth
My
is,
truth is,
well, okay, fine, if it's from your experience, but there are things that are objectively true. You can't redefine those things. That's when you get into deep trouble. So, be talking a little bit about that. Culture is a subject I have been contemplating for a long time. And one of the interesting things about the word culture is that it has analogous definitions. One definition would be kind of the big culture, the world we live in, the books, the movies, the art, the customs of people around them. And then what you can't control that. You can't control all of the stuff that everybody else does. But your corporate culture, you can control what comes into your home, what's on the bookshelves, what's on the walls, what comes through the screens and the speakers, what's in the pantry and the closets. All of that you have control over. But both of these kind of pale in significance until you look at the third definition of culture, which is the petri dish, right? The little dish of yellow jello. What is that? It's a culture. What's it do? Well, you put in a little bacteria or mold or whatever, and you grow something. So the idea that culture is supposed to grow something. And while we can't control the general culture, we can control the corporate culture. And so the big question there is, what are we trying to grow in our homes, in our companies, in our school rooms, whatever, the things that we have control over, what are we trying to grow? And I would guess that most of the people who listen to me are trying to grow, character, faith, values, a deeper understanding, truth, a love of truth. And so that's really where the raising Christian communicators comes in. And not just raising individuals, but raising, if you're in a war, you need to raise a whole army of people who are going to be able to affect culture in a way that grows the things that should be grown. So that's the first talk. The second talk is the three best things I did as a homeschool dad, and actually there's four. So if I have time, I'll squeeze in the fourth. But these are, I think, useful things that are not directly connected with curriculum per se, but what influence a dad can have in the home environment, in the home culture, that's going to nourish and nurture those things that the primary educator, usually the mom, is trying to accomplish. So the third session is probably the most practical in terms of here are some very specific things you can do from preschool to high school to cultivate the arts of language, how to cultivate better listening, better speaking, better reading, better writing. And so that's a very, very practical talk. And then the last one, nurturing competent communicators, is really the two critical things that I know will give you a better writer and speaker down line. And those are, of course, number one, reading aloud to children in huge quantity, and also the value of memorized language. That's
Hmm.
another thing we saw with the rise of modern education. We saw the decline of the value of memory.
Yes.
And people say, well, why memorize anything? You can just go ask your phone.
Right.
Why memorize that? Why, isn't that rote learning? And that must be de facto bad because everybody hates that word rote
Right.
learning. Whereas, really, when we think about the traditional idea of memorizing, my mother, who was a music teacher, never said, memorize your pieces. She
Hmm.
always used the expression, learn it by heart.
Right.
And you don't hear people say that much anymore.
Yeah.
But when you memorize something, whether it's a beautiful poem or a bit of scripture, or a quote or an excerpt from a famous speech, you are not just bringing that into your mind to furnish your mind with, the vocabulary, the grammar, and the ideas. You're bringing it into your heart. And
Right.
so furnishing the mind and the heart with what's good and true and beautiful in language, but also, in music and dance and all of these forms. I think that is one of the greatest gifts we can give to our children when when they're grown up and leave home. It's what are they carrying around with them?
Right.
How's that going to serve them in whatever God calls them to later on?
Thank you for sharing that. Memory work is a fairly new concept for me, and that started when I began homeschooling my children. And I started to understand it as pegs. So just like you have your bookshelf, you can pull things off the shelf, but you have to put something there first. So before I was like, wait, this is a lot of content for an 8-year old, or this is a lot of content for a 6-year old. But I think sometimes we introduce something and we just give them so much information, we never go back to it. Whereas when you do it in the trivium phase, you can actually teach the grammar and then go through all the stages of dialectic and rhetoric. And things are actually exploding in their brain because you've put different pegs on the shelf and they can start to connect the pieces. So, like when you were talking about humor, that twinkle in the eye and the, oh, I get it, that's the memory work definitely operates in that way too. It's like you put something on the shelf and then they start to marinate and they have it in their mind. And then eventually they can actually debate about something that before was just memorization.
Well, and if you don't give children beautiful things to
Right.
memorize, they will memorize whatever junk is in their environment,
Right.
right? TV commercials, rap song,
Yeah.
whatever. So that's why, I am always encouraging parents to curate the best possible stuff for their children to read, for them to memorize, and elevate language to that higher level wherein intellectual and spiritual understanding comes more easily.
Exactly. And it's also a very organic way because I think a 95-year-old person can memorize the alphabet because they learn it through song, right? So when I see a child, maybe a young child, and the parent is saying, oh, they can't memorize their times table, but I hear them repeating every single word in like a popular song, I'm like, this child has the ability.
Yeah, or boys who, you think, oh, it'd be too hard for them to memorize names and dates and
Yeah.
events, but they know every single baseball statistic for every
Right.
pro player
Or every
out there, how
dinosaur.
many
Yeah.
home runs they scored in the, 2013 season.
Right.
So part of it, has to do with the motivation, and part of it has to do with the environment.
Right.
And so motivation is another subject that I love to talk about. I don't think it's on the menu for this coming event, but one of the things, and I'm sure you've perhaps heard this or even had this thought. Parents will walk up to me and say, "I just want my children to enjoy writing."
Mhm.
And I will challenge that right off. That's not the right goal. The
Mm,
goal is to have them like doing something, and you're going to work toward that goal by kind of cheerleading them into it and say, "Yeah, it's really fun if uh, you're doing so good." That's not the experience that actually motivates. What does? What motivates is getting better at something,
intrinsic, right?
right? If you want to play the piano, you're only going to be motivated if you have a sense of improvement.
Right,
If
that
you do
progress.
something like martial arts or gymnastics, you're going to quit right off unless you have that experience of becoming more competent at doing it. Writing is the same way. You can't cheerlead a kid into liking it.
Mm,
Can, however, teach them the basic skills where they perceive that they're actually getting better at doing it. And when they realize that, even semi-consciously, they will want to do it more and start to enjoy it.
absolutely. There's one thing I wanted to go back to as you were talking about your first keynote with the culture. That last definition you gave really resonated with me because I've had people come up to me and say, "Oh, you homeschool? Aren't you concerned about socialization?" And they expect me to say, "Oh, yeah, I'm a little concerned." And what I say is, yes, and that's exactly why I homeschool. I am concerned about the socialization that they will get as a result from not being in the corporate culture. Like, I've never heard it explained the way you just did, but that's exactly what we're doing. It's such a beautiful opportunity to control the culture that we want them to live in. It's not about putting them in a bubble, it's not about isolating them, but it's about that corporate culture. And that's so beautifully put. I cannot wait to attend that talk.
Well, and one huge difference is if you look at almost all schools, like 98% of 5-day week schools, they are age segregating children.
Right.
So you put, 20 some 10-year-olds in one room together for 6 hours a day, 200 days a year. What's the culture you're getting? Well, unfortunately, kids in particular, and we all can do this if we're not careful, but kids will naturally kind of sink down to the
Mm.
lowest common level of vocabulary, the lowest common level of thought or humor or idea. And
Rather than
it's
the
very,
reverse of rising.
yeah, it's very unnatural. Whereas in a home school, right, very few people have all their kids the same age,
Right.
right? Usually there's, 2, 3 years between
Yeah.
them, and you've got two or three or four of them, and then you've got adults, and then you go to, say, a homeschool co-op situation, and you've got mixed age groupings.
Hmm.
This is far superior a social environment because if you've got a bunch of 9-year-olds, there's two things that are distinctly uncool. One is to say, uh, you know, oh, that Sally, she's smarter and well spoken and better behaved and polite. I want to be more like her,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The other thing is for Sally to say, oh, Billy there, he's kind of disrespectful. He doesn't use very good vocabulary. He tells dumb jokes. I have to really work hard to influence him positively. They don't think that way. So if those two kids are going to have a relationship, they have to sink down to the lowest level they can do it. Whereas if you've got, a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old in one room together, the 12-year-old puts on the, big brother, big sister, leader, teacher mode. They are naturally operating at their higher level because it's instinctive for them to be an example for younger children. And younger children, as you know, will imitate older children for better or worse. So I believe a mixed age group
Yeah.
social setting is far superior for socialization than age segregated groupings.
I would agree. And I have two thoughts on that. One, having everyone in the same age is not an accurate reflection of society. right?
Yeah.
Like I've had bosses who were 5, 10 years older than me, and I've had bosses who were younger than me. So when you go out into the world, I'm not going to say, well, we can't work together because you were born in the year I was born. It's not an accurate reflection. And I actually think it does affect socialization because I have a girlfriend who would say to me, oh, I don't have anyone. Um, I can't make any friends here. And I say, no, what you're looking for is someone who is also 40, also has a child this age. Also, you're looking for these similarities because that's how we were conditioned. Everyone in my age has to be plus or minus X months. And I'm like, you're telling me there's no one in your community who you can befriend. And it's because of that mindset. Of course, there are people there who you can befriend, but not everyone looks like you from like chronologically, right? So I think it also affects the way we see the world.
It does. And um, I think the best testament to homeschooling for most people, if they're on the edge of it and they want to find out about it, is to come to an event and meet this diversity of people, meet other people's kids, and have a conversation with a homeschooled 12-year-old who's read some good and great books, who's learned a little bit of logic, who has an above average vocabulary. And you're going to say, yeah, I would like my kid to grow up and be a little bit more like that rather than all the other kids I see of that age. So I think our children, for the most part, obviously there's a few exceptions, outliers, but for the most part, our children are the best testimonial for the benefits of homeschooling, particularly on the social and behavioral side of things.
Right. And thank you to you for also the economic piece of that. I've asked you a ton of questions, Mr. Pudua. Is there anything you want to share? Any final thoughts that you want to share with the listeners?
Um, I just, my life right now is all about what does God want me to do? Right? My kids are grown. I've got grandchildren. The
Yeah,
tension is between, what can I do for everybody else in the world, and how do I not lose time with my own grandchildren since I'm
right.
going to die soon and I don't know when I'm
Hopefully
going to
not too soon.
not I'm not sick or anything, but you hit 60 something and you realize, okay, you're not going to be around forever. And with the grandchildren, I want to do whatever I can to have as positive an effect on them and support their parents in that. And I'm very grateful that all of my children who have home school age children are homeschooling them. And so it becomes a generational thing. And I look at my kids as parents and I think they are so better than I was at that age.
Aw.
And I look at the grandchildren and I think they're doing so well. So there's a generational effect that I'm starting to see.
Mhm.
And I think, if we want to really do what God can help us to do to make the world a better place, thinking generationally is different. And a lot of young people, you look at millennials and Gen Zs, and so much of their thinking is about, I want my life to be good and happy and comfortable right now. Whereas, 100, 200, 500, 2,000 years ago, people were not thinking that way. They were thinking, how do I work now to make a better world for my children's children's children?
Yeah,
And so
that's
that's
really beautiful.
so you can start even young, like you. You can start thinking generationally. And I think, we find that, particularly in the Christian homeschooling world, people much more apt to think that way. And that brings a certain selflessness, right? What
Mhm.
sacrifices can I make now for the betterment of the world to come? And of course, homeschooling is a sacrifice, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
And sometimes mothers can overdo it and like, I will kill myself. I will expend every bit of my energy and suck myself dry to give my children everything I can. And so that's a balance too, because you have
absolutely.
to be in a good condition
Right.
to be a good
Can't pour
teaching.
from an empty cup.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
so that's kind of, where I'm at my ripe old age of 65.
I appreciate you for sharing that. I was listening to a pastor yesterday and he said literally the same thing you said. I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but something he was talking about is, the impact and your legacy and all of that. And he says, if you don't leave the world a better place, or if you don't give more than you receive, then you're a generational thief. I was like, whoa, that's harsh, but
That is
that's exactly true, right?
a
So
generational thief.
I know.
That's
It's
going
like
to
you
stick in
came,
my
you
mind
saw,
a little bit here.
yeah,
Yeah.
because you did nothing else, right? Like you just left the world as you saw it, or you contributed nothing. So, and another thing that same pastor says is the richest place on earth is actually the cemetery, because that's where you have all the people who never wrote the poem, never wrote the book, never sang the song, never did the thing that God created them on earth, and they just died. So his goal is to die empty, knowing that he did every single thing on earth. And he gave a message about finishing strong and dying empty, and then he died a couple weeks later.
Well, and that's so beautiful because if you do empty yourself in giving what you can, you're now you can now be filled up with God's grace.
Right.
We cling to what we want, and that's can sometimes be a barrier to what God wants for us. And so part of the whole, experience, journey, if you want to call it that, whatever, of homeschooling is, I think, doing that, emptying yourself and modeling that for your kids so that they see you giving all that you can to your neighbors, to your friends, to your community, to your church, to your country. And that is the model for them then to affect what type of citizens, what type of parents, what type of community and church members they become. And again, it goes back to, it's not the book learning that makes character, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the experiences we have, and the idea of selflessness is not
Mm,
very popular, especially among the generation who says, well, my truth is that I should be comfortable and that'll somehow make me happy.
right.
And then they end up being old and unhappy.
Yeah. So true. Every time you say something, I have 25 more things to say, so I'm not going to respond to that. But please don't leave because I told my boys I was interviewing you today and they cannot wait to meet you. They met you in Ohio.
Okay.
Um, I think it was yeah last year in the Great Homeschool Conference or something they met you. But thank you so much for your time today. This conversation was elevated as it was entertaining. And there you have it, everyone. Mr. Andrew Pudewa will be at the Midwinter Conference this February 21st and 22nd in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Thank you to the man who inspires us all to trade blah for brilliance, Mr. Pudewa.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, Ro. God bless you.
Thank you.